Hello, this is a Ukrainian YouTube channel 100 Green. This is a channel of green transformation of Ukraine. I'm Dmitry Vasilov, and today our guest is Alan Dobrovolsky, Director of International Operations at ADE Consulting Group in Australia. Alan, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for contacting us and being with us today. The topic for our program today is environmental impact of Russian war against Ukraine. The war of this intensiveness is just unbelievable. We soon will have about 500 days of this war, and every day the impact of contamination on air, soil, and water because of this war is just unbelievable. So, Alan, my first question to you, what do you see is happening right now in Ukraine because of the war in terms of this environmental impact?
Well, first of all, I would like to agree with you that the intensiveness is unbelievable, as you stressed. And this is widely recognized one of the biggest, if not the biggest, conflict since the Second World War. The amount of ammunition used, shells and bullets and everything is really goes through the roof, as some people say. And in terms of the impact on the environment, obviously, as a consequence, is really above the beyond everything what people might expect, particularly along the front line. Obviously, many people would recognize videos of some battles taken from the air, where you can see fields look like a lunar landscape. Every 2 or 3 meters there is a big impact from shells and from rockets and everything. So obviously these areas will be highly impacted. There are several contaminants which many experts agree on will be listed and will need to be addressed by the remediation authorities in Ukraine or whatever in the EU, whoever will be taking care of this situation in the future. Obviously, the contaminants expected will be hydrocarbons as part of the fuels, I guess, when the machineries and weapons are being damaged. Obviously there will be lots of plumes coming from, or leakages coming from the this machines of war, whatever. It could be mortars, could be tanks and other machineries. Also, we will expect the polyaromatic hydrocarbons as the products when the fuel or other materials are burned. Obviously, a list of probably 20 to 30 cancerogenic polyaromatic hydrocarbons will be expected. The next one on the list is PFAS. So we call PFAS is a group of polyfluoroalkyl substances, which are part of the munition. So they actually, when they are made and when the explosive products are made and inserted into the shells and everything, these substances are used, particularly in shells. Also, The contaminants I will expect would be obviously unexploded ordnance, which is a big part, and I believe Ukraine now is taking care of this gradually. Also depleted uranium, which is particularly shell supplied by our countries helping Ukraine, because quite a few different shells would contain. I'm not sure how publicized it is, or the information is open in the public domain, but there will be probably 20 to 40% of shells would contain depleted uranium. And the last one, but not the least, is asbestos in buildings, in demolished buildings or damaged buildings. In the EU, it's quite a big issue, particular for residential properties, residential areas where developments and renovations will be happening in the future. It might be quite a significant issue. Apart from the removal of asbestos from this impacted buildings or properties, there will need to be remediation done, because asbestos obviously is an issue, and can be, the people who will be taking care of the renovation or remediation of this size will be expected to be affected. So it's a big issue. I mean, all these contaminants need to be, of course, taken care of, and a program would need to be set up and approved by, I believe, in Ukraine, part of the EU. There should be some sort of an approval by the Union itself as well. So I believe, it's a big job for Ukraine in future.
Alan, this is really incredible and amazing what you're telling us about all this effect of contamination on the environment of Ukraine, soil, air, and water. It's really incredible. But could you, for a wider audience, could you tell more in details as simple examples how it will influence our agriculture, our water supply, our health of people? And perhaps you can also, with this example, can tell that the impact will be not only on Ukraine, but in fact, when we're talking about water and agriculture, when we're talking about air, perhaps the impact on the EU will be as well. And this is not a problem only Ukraine, but European countries. Could you tell a little bit more in detail and in a simple words about this?
It's a good question, because obviously contamination, particular hydrocarbons and the PFAS, as I mentioned, they are very persistent. They are very difficult to be dissolved, right? So when the impact has happened, they stay on the ground for a long time. So obviously, when the rain, the weather basically take this with the infiltration into the groundwater. Then from the groundwater it goes into rivers, and the rivers goes to the ocean, to the sea, Black Sea, for example. So potentially, if it hasn't already been impacted, it will definitely, we will expect this to be happening in the future.
And by the way, from the Black Sea, it will go to the Medieval Sea.
Yeah,
and the ocean, as you say. So I think the world can be influenced incredibly.
Particularly the events like with Nova Kakhovka, which happened a couple of weeks, 10 days ago or so, it will actually increase the spread of this contamination into surface waters and land into bottom sediments, and then biota. So it's the whole cycle, the whole natural cycle will be affected. There is no doubt. To what extent we will need to see, we will need to, investigate and take samples, analyze samples, pretty on a large scale. Environmental investigation has to be conducted. Also, what I should note is that the contaminants like PFAS, the soil, first couple of centimeters up to 10 centimeters of soil in the combat areas probably will need to be removed completely, because the PFAS will stay on the ground for maybe hundreds of years, and possibly heavy metals and obviously uranium, depleted uranium. It's better to get rid of these contaminants ASAP.
And by the way, Alan, we're talking about the black soil, which is very rare for the Earth, for the planet Earth.
Yes, exactly. Ukraine has very rich soil, and it is a significant impact, will be significant impact on the economy of the country, obviously. So task number one would be to determine how widespread this contamination is. There is no doubt it will be along the front line where all these explosions occurred, and the buildings around, the areas around the damaged buildings obviously will be expected to be with high concentrations of these contaminants. So a program of setting special areas where this soil can be removed and stored for hundreds of years will need to be addressed, will need to be found, and this area is established. So as I can see, it probably would be insisted by the Union or by the Ukrainian authorities that there will be a pilot program conducted, and this has to be done as soon as possible, because it may take time to learn how quickly these contaminants may reach groundwater. And groundwater, the whole Ukraine, in the whole country, is a supply of drinking water.
Yeah.
As you all know, in wells and everything, and water in many areas of Ukraine are quite close to the surface. So from 2 to 5 meters, it probably would be an average in many parts where people live. And for infiltration, for the water for the rainwater, for example, to infiltrate through the soil profile, it may take just from a year to two, and the whole water supply will be contaminated, and people will not be able to drink. That's what happened in many areas in the US and in Australia as well. We took part in investigation not far from Melbourne, within the site where the military had exercises and everything for quite a few years, and the whole area is impacted. And we know a lot of military areas where they test weapons and everything in the US. That's where the problem actually started, from the US. It's well known now for quite a few years that high concentrations of PFAS are in water, and people been proven to be affected by this. So it definitely, that's the scenario. The worst case scenario is for Ukraine, that areas along the front line will definitely be affected.
Yes. This is incredible what you're telling, talking about the impact for years ahead. And when I'm hearing about the soil contamination and perhaps necessity of digging it up, the scene of European Green Deal comes to my mind, and in fact, world's Green Deal. Because when we're talking about the carbon leakage and carbon footprint, we're also talking about agriculture, and there's a way to diminish carbon leakage by special agriculture approach to the land when you basically dig not that deep. And when we're talking about the soil erosion in Ukraine and all this contamination and digging it up, we're also talking about the huge carbon leakage from Ukraine. And this is a big deal for European Green Deal. Could you actually make a little stand on that issue about carbon leakage because of this situation? Because some scientists are saying that actually that carbon leakage we're having right now because of the war is just enormous. Could you tell a little bit about this, Alan?
First of all, I have a question. When you say carbon leakage, you mean
CO2.
CO2 from what sort of operations?
You've been telling about the necessity to analyze the cover of the soil and then perhaps to take it out. But when you dig the soil, it makes CO2 getting up in the air. And that's what I mean by carbon leakage.
Well, yeah, Ukraine is a well-developed agricultural country, and land farming, when you cultivate soil, obviously there will be some carbon evaporated during this process. This is not the area where I could sort of comment a lot, because we were not doing any investigation on this part. We're probably mostly on the contaminated sites in Australia, in some overseas countries.
Okay.
But this definitely will be potentially will be an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. But anyhow, thanks for your remark, because it will be a big issue as well, both for Ukraine and for Europe, taking into account that European Green Deal is a big deal for European Union. And as we understand, Ukraine is a part of European Green Deal process, and Ukraine is integrating to European Union. And I'm totally sure that will be a European Union member state, and it will be a big deal not only for Ukraine but whole European continent. But coming back to contamination, you've been very articulate about soil and water contamination. So perhaps you could tell a little bit more about the air contamination, and perhaps you could explain more in detail what is happening right now, and how it can influence actually European continent, both European Union countries and those countries who came with the war to us. And we're talking about Russia and Belarus.
Yes, air contamination is basically consequences of what is happening now on the battlefields in Ukraine. It's probably, I would say, maybe a smaller issue than the soil contamination, but it still needs to be addressed, because air masses obviously move to from affected areas and may cross, the whole country and go to neighboring countries. Yes, this issue needs to be sort of addressed as well and studied. I don't think at least I don't know the studies conducted in this area. I know that some contaminants like general contaminants like particles which make people sick, like when they breathe, like dust particles. Quite a few studies, and it could have some sort of correlation if we could have a look at the studies of particulates. In English, it's in this field they call concentration of particles in the air. So yeah, by studying this, we could probably could correlate and find out the migration path, for example, of the air contaminants during the war, and so on. Yeah.
Okay, Alan, I would like actually ask you a question which is perhaps not your area, but because you are a scientist, ecologist in many ways in this field of your activities, and in many ways what is going on, it's a human, man-made disaster. I mean, the war and all what is happening and making impact to Ukraine, to the planet. So this is a lot about political, diplomatic, and social issue. Recently, after the man-made disaster done by Russian terrorists, I could call them like this, in Kakhovka, when they destroyed the dam, bombed the dam, and it caused all this catastrophe with a lot of contamination of the soil, water, and with all this water getting through to the Black Sea, and all these contaminants will go further, as we're telling, to Medieval Sea and to the ocean. And the reaction of the world and such usually loud organizations like Greenpeace, such kind of personalities like Greta Thunberg, United Nations, and all those organizations, they were kind of hesitant to be articulate and fast in the articulation of what is happening. And I think it motivates Russian terrorists to go further. And we're talking about nuclear power plant, Zaporizhia, NPP. We're talking about any ways of possibilities of using them, nuclear bomb, atomic bomb. We know that actually they declare that they will put something in Belarus, and Belarusian self-made leader is telling about this. So what do you think about this response of international communities? What do you see is happening, and what do you think the response must be to stop it?
Well, my personal opinion that from day one, when not only Ukraine allowed Russians to take over, for example, Chernobyl power station and Zaporizhia power station, in the first half a year or so, there obviously was a shock for the international community, and they did not respond in a harsh way to the Russians, about the actions they were doing. And as you know, they eventually the Ukrainian army pushed the Russians away from the Chernobyl power station. So from what I can see at this point, Ukraine, or up to this point, pretty much, Ukraine has been or had been left pretty much alone, to deal with this situation itself. And it expelled the Russians from, as I said, from the Chernobyl power station. So the international community sort of woke up eventually and MAGATE sent experts to the Zaporizhia power station. Well, in my opinion, Europe and the rest of the world was sort of has been in shock for quite a while. Now it is sort of started, planning actions, not only military actions, but economic and sanctions and everything in a harsher way than it has been. So I have a hope that this situation will probably be sorted out sooner than we thought a year ago or so, because there was no hope a year ago. There was no hope that we could expel the Russians from Ukraine. Now, pretty much we have a hope, and from that point we will need to cooperate with the international community, and particularly with the EU, in order to set up environmental programs and take all the standards, European standards, because as I know, for many contaminants I just listed before, there are no standards in Ukraine, as I found out, unfortunately. So when you do the remediation, particularly affected areas like in Nova Kakhovka you mentioned, or along the line, the front line, we need, or Ukraine will need, standards for remediation. Because if you don't have standards and procedures are sort of not followed to the international standards, instead of removing, for example, say 5 centimeters of affected soil, people will not follow the standards and remove more, and it will be not cost effective, particularly with the such rich and good soil which is in Ukraine.
Yep, incredible. Listen, Alan, I think we covered most of the questions we wanted to talk with you about today. Just resuming our conversation, if you would like, please tell us a little bit more about your organization, your activities, and perhaps you have any plans for more active involvement to Ukrainian, activities here in Ukraine. Could you tell a little bit more about this?
Well, the company I work for is an AD consulting group. Basically, we are well-developed and quite big environmental company. We deal with contamination of soil, water, groundwater, and air as well. Basically, I started this company in 1997, and quite a few projects we've done all over Australia as well as overseas. I wrote to the Department of Natural Resources or Water Resources, offering our help regarding procedures for analytical procedures, because we've done quite a big job, and not many laboratories would have such an expertise as we currently have after having this project in Australia where we remediated a large military base with contamination, PFAS contamination and metals and everything. So our expertise will definitely be useful if we can find connections and points of interest in Ukraine. Maybe in the future we could probably help even with some equipment, like analytical instruments and everything. It's a big job, but the sooner we start, the better.
Great. And by the way, we have incredibly active ambassador of Ukraine to Australia, Vasyl Miroshnichenko. I think he is a great contact. So anytime you need to talk anything about any opportunity for a project in Ukraine, you can always talk to him as well. I think he is very proactive, and he is one of the leaders of Ukraine, based in Australia. So Please keep in mind that too. Now, listen, Alan, that was really great to talking to you. Very serious, important issues are very much there. The war is continuing, and environmental impact of this war is continuing here in Ukraine. And we hope the offense which our military is doing right now against Russians will make our land free very soon, and we will keep our sovereignty and independence of Ukraine. And actually, we have to keep in mind that this is not only war of Russia against of Ukraine, against of our territory. This is war of autocrats against of freedom, free countries. And Ukraine is definitely a part of this free world. And we're defending not only our land, but the free world. And let's hope that, the war will be finished very soon. And the environmental impact of that will be less horrible as we can imagine. Alan, thank you very much. Thank you to all. That is YouTube channel 100 Green, YouTube channel of Green Transformation of Ukraine. And I'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.